So earlier this year, in February, I reached the 100k subscriber mark. Thank you so much for that, by the way. I was planning to do a 100k Q&A video in February to celebrate, but I got busy. So we're doing it now. I did a 10k subscriber Q&A a while back, but if you didn't watch that video, I don't blame you, it's kind of boring. I'm going to quickly address some of the questions from that video that also came up when I asked for a question this time. So I was born in 97, I'm from Bratislava, Slovakia. I speak and read these languages, although since the last video I did pick up Latin and I'm intensively studying German, as I need to know both of those languages for my academics. Anyways, first question. Vodka or rakia? Pivo. University! Currently the University of Oxford. What events do you think were the biggest game changers for Eastern Europe throughout history? I have to say the migration period during the early Middle Ages. Although I'm quite biased in this, you'll find out why later. So basically it was from the migration period that the current cultural and ethnic makeup of not just Eastern Europe but Europe in general stems from. And it is this ethnic makeup that fueled much of the nation-centric history of modern Europe and still affects our politics to this day. Well, there are actually a lot of caveats to that statement I just said, and if you want to know more about it, then read the Myth of Nations book. But even then, I don't think any historians would argue that the migration period wasn't at least one of the most influential events in European history. What is your favorite area of history to look into? What's your favorite time period of history and why? Well, when you study history, once you're past your BA, you have to specialize, sometimes even during your BA. And I chose to specialize in the area of history I like the most, which is the early medieval period. Even more specifically, I'm an early Eastern European medievalist. That covers basically anything dealing with the area east of the Franks from the circa 6th century to the circa 10th century. For example, my master's dissertation focused on the Avaro-Slavic relations and their evolution during the Khanate's existence. I chose this particular area of history to focus on because it basically deals with the migration period and its aftermath. And as I've already mentioned, the migration period really was one of the most influential events in European history, and the way it played out affected events all the way to the 19th and 20th century. So it is really important and also really interesting. I chose to focus on Eastern Europe specifically because that's where I'm from, but also because good current Eastern European historians that write about this time period that aren't affected by nationalistic or other agendas are hard to come by. They definitely do exist. It's just that there's not that many of them, and the couple of good ones that do exist also don't always publish in English, making their material even more obscure. Would you consider doing any alternate history videos? No, alternate history is fiction, or in other words, historical fiction, and I'm not a fiction writer, I'm a historian. How did you get interested into history? What started your love of history? I cannot really say how it started. I just know I was always interested in anything history related. I loved going to the history museum in Bratislava and the ones in Vienna, and when I was a kid, every time my family would travel somewhere, we would stop to see old castles and skanzens. I even remember I had this passport-like collection book where every time you visited a different castle in Slovakia and Czechia, you got a unique stamp of that castle in the book and you could then collect them all. I also remember that back then I was far more into Roman history than I'm now. I visited all the Roman sites around Bratislava, like Carnuntum or the Roman military camp in Rusovce, but now that I'm older, when it comes to the classical period, I'm actually far more interested in classical Greece than Rome. Although, of course, the period I find the most interesting now is the early medieval period, as already mentioned. So circling back, my answer is I have always been interested in history, and I cannot really pinpoint when and how it started. Explain historical relativism. Why shouldn't we apply it when evaluating historical figures? In your opinion, what are some pros and cons to historical relativism? Philosophy wasn't my strongest subject, but I can give my 2 cents. Relativism is an idea that right and wrong, or what is considered truth, or just standards of reasoning, are relative, meaning they differ from person to person, from time period to time period, and from culture to culture. This means that the abstract properties of things, such as being morally right or wrong or something looking beautiful, are relative to a given framework of assessment like cultural norms, personal standards, etc. Due to this, the meaning of statements like something being morally right or wrong wrong can only be understood once the framework of assessment of an individual or a group that made those statements is defined. In essence, you cannot fully understand an abstract statement by someone, for example, "this looks beautiful," if you do not understand their framework of assessment by which they assess that thing to be beautiful. However, you yourself are also bound by a certain framework of assessment by which you assess things like right or wrong or something being beautiful. That framework of assessment could be a combination of your religious beliefs, cultural upbringing, personal standards, etc. And since everyone has this unique framework of assessment, relativists argue that there exists no independent vantage point from which to assess whether something is truly morally right or wrong or beautiful, etc. It is all relative. Due to this, in its most extreme form, relativism can be used to condemn those who project their own assessment of things like morality towards acts like genocide, which were conducted by peoples whose frameworks of assessment completely differed from that of our own, and therefore their assessment of what is morally right or wrong differed as well. Basically, who's to say something is morally right or wrong when such an abstract concept is defined by a person's unique framework of assessment, which by nature has no independent vantage point? After all, one man's hero is another man's villain. Now, relativism, just like any other kind of philosophical ism, has variations and different interpretations, and some of its parts overlap with other isms like subjectivism and contextualism, but all this is beyond the scope of answering this question. However, I can give my opinion about relativism being applied to history. Humans have always had some kind of a framework of assessment through which they assessed abstract things like morality or beauty or even love, and they have almost always projected their assessment of these things onto the past and sometimes even the future. The framework of assessment through which people assessed things obviously changed over time and differed between cultures and individuals. The two main frameworks of assessment the historian needs to take into considerations when writing history are the ones of the people in the time and area he's writing about and in the time and area he is from. Also important to the context are the frameworks of assessment of the people living in between then and now. This is the historiography part of the historical essay. What is usually the most contested issue of all this is that people today, including some historians, try to project their current assessments of abstract ideas like what is morally right or wrong, which are defined by current frameworks of assessments, onto the people in the past, even though the people in the past clearly had completely different frameworks of assessment by which they assessed what is morally right and wrong. Relativists would argue that this projection is a bad practice because, as we have discussed, all abstract ideas like morality cannot be judged because there doesn't exist an independent vantage point from which to judge them. However, I would argue that doesn't matter. People have always had different frameworks of assessments, and they have always projected their assessment of abstract ideas onto the past. Why should we be any different? I'm sure there will be people 500 years from now talking about how our assessment of morality and beauty were completely wrong. We as a society, through our current frameworks of assessment, have decided that genocide is morally bad, and as such, we should treat genocide in history as morally bad. With that said, what must be emphasized here is that the frameworks of assessment used by a person or a peoples in assessing abstract ideas like morality should be contextualized by a historian, because only then can a more fuller picture of a historical event be gotten. It is important to understand why peoples in the past thought it was morally justifiable to conduct a genocide, or, on a lighter note, why they thought a certain thing looked beautiful. There are plenty of events, or just people, in the past that we would today unequivocally call bad, that at the time might have been completely normal or even milder than the norm, and I see no reason why all this cannot be mentioned by a historian, stating that by our standards this person was terrible due to these things, but by the standards of the time he wasn't that bad because of these frameworks of assessment of that time. Hopefully that answers the question. I'm not really sure if it does. I myself got lost about halfway through explaining it. Anyways. Lost historical works you'd love the most to get your hands on. I'd love to read the memoirs of Sulla, such an interesting guy. I know right away what work I want to get my hands on. I would love to get my hands on the 12-volume book on the history of the Goths by Cassiodorus. You have no idea how much I thought about this. We have only one book on the history of the Goths, and that is the Gericka, written by Jordanes, and that book has so many problems and is anyways just a very poorly abridged version of Cassiodorus' work. Just imagine how much more we would know if we had that book, not just about the Goths, but also about the history of early Eastern Europe. Like Cassiodorus in the book most certainly talked about all the other people that interacted with the Goths, like the Slavs, the Huns, the Dacians, maybe even Baltic tribes when the Goths were in the north of Eastern Europe. Who knows just how much new information we would gather about the state of Eastern Europe in the late classical and early medieval period if we had that book. Now, Cassiodorus, during his life, founded a monastery at Vivarium in southern Italy, and I have thought about how great it would be if in the ruins of that monastery somewhere a box or just parchment containing the book would be found. It would be so great. Alas, sadly, that's not gonna happen. Is hot dog a sandwich? No. OMG, would you defeat a horse-sized duck? Well, functioning horse-sized duck clearly doesn't follow the square cube law, which means it's a magical duck, and I clearly cannot defeat a magical duck. What is your favorite song? Like, how am I supposed to answer that? Whatever I say, I will be judged by it forever, even though in reality I listen to a variety of music genres, but I can only answer my one favorite song. You know what? Whatever. I don't care. I'm just going to look up what's the most played song on my Spotify. And it is Starlight by Taylor Swift. Judge away. What books would you recommend about history? It can be any period/topic. The one that comes to mind first, most likely because I recently read it for my Nomad video, is the Cambridge History of Early Inner Asia. It's, I think, the best introduction to the Eurasian nomad history there is, even though research-wise it has some outdated points, but it's still really good, and quite entertaining to read. For historical books, I would always recommend reading Thucydides, because even though he's very dry when compared to his contemporary Herodotus, he is so analytical that I think it's with him that the writing of history truly started, not with Herodotus. Don't get me wrong, Herodotus was still a good step forward, but he did play lip service to supernatural events and wrote in a more sensationalized story-like way, which was similar to how history was written before the historical method. Basically, I view Herodotus as the transition from fictionalized storytelling of history like the Iliad to using the historical method for writing history, which is what Thucydides did. So to me, Thucydides was the first historian, and therefore I think it's important to read his work. Plus, you'll notice that some of the things he talks about are still applicable to this day, even though it was almost 2,500 years ago. It's quite interesting. Why'd you start and what helps you keep going? For this question, I had like a 2-page answer ready, but in reality, when I looked through it, I realized it was all really boring stuff, so I'm just going to extremely oversimplify it. I started because, first, I wanted to be a YouTuber. I know that sounds shallow, but that was one of the reasons nonetheless. Second, because I just like history and I have always read history books, so making videos about something I like just sounded like fun. Third, history documentaries on TV were getting worse, and at that time there weren't that many history YouTubers on the platform, so I thought I was filling in a nice niche. Fourth, I wanted to prove a concept to myself, which was that history is not a useless major to study and I can actually make money with it if I don't go the traditional academic route. Which, in the end, I actually did go the traditional academic route, but I don't think I would have gone that route if I didn't have YouTube as kind of a fallback. Over time, a fifth reason emerged for why I do YouTube, and that is variety. Often, as an academic historian, you get stuck in researching a single topic in a single time period, and sometimes this can get a bit dull since there is little variety. But with YouTube, I can pick whatever topic I want to research about, and that's amazing. The variety of topics I research into for YouTube really does help me keep my passion for history, as I'm not stuck with doing just one specific thing. Every time I feel a bit bored with my academic work, I can go and research into the Viennese coffee house, or the Mexican War of of independence, things that I would normally never write about if I was just doing the traditional medievalist route. So I guess that explains why I started YouTube and also why I'm continuing doing YouTube. Well, that and the little extra money I get from it is also nice, but don't be fooled, it's nothing major. If it was, I would be doing YouTube full time. As it is, I'm not, but maybe in the future. What are the books you have used frequently in your videos as reference and/or research? What are some positives and negatives you would personally say about each of them? Since my video topics are all over the place, I rarely use the same book twice. Like the books I used for the Maximilian video are kind of useless for my early medieval nomads video. With that said, during my research as an early Eastern European medievalist, there is a book that comes up time and time again, and that is Curthas, The Making of the Slav. And a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions about this book. If you never read it and you're interested in early Slavic history, I definitely recommend reading it. Even if you already know the book's conclusion ahead of time and you don't agree with it, it is still a remarkable piece of research you should read. The amount of work Curta did to write it is nothing less than astounding, and it contains the most complete information on early Slavic sources out there. With all that said though, Curta did use postmodernist and Toronto School ideas for his conclusion, which many historians, including me, don't agree with. He views the Slavic ethnicity as being socially constructed by outside observers who imparted the Slavic ethnos upon a people who did not have an ethnic identity. He expanded on this point in his follow-up book published very recently, where he argued that the Slavic languages were constructed as a lingua franca by various peoples and they did not originate from a single Proto-Slavic language, which would support the fact that the Slavic ethnicity did not originate from a single ethnic identity, but was rather imparted on the quote Slavic people. Now, I'm not going to get into why I don't agree with Curta, because that would take far too long, but in short, it seems to me that Curta's ideas are an extreme counter-reaction to the prominent nationalistic and conservative views of the many Eastern European historians, which honestly still last in one way or another to this day in Eastern Europe. But yeah, The Making of the Slavs is a very prominent book, and even though I don't agree with its conclusion, I have to say it is a must-read if you are interested in early Slavic history. What is one area of history that you would like to learn more about? Area of history that I know almost nothing about and would like to know more about is classical and medieval China. Area of history that I know a fair bit about, but also am aware that there's still a giant amount of history I don't know and would like to know, is 19th and early 20th century Europe and Latin American history. Has your general view of history or worldview changed since you started doing history YouTube? If so, are there any videos you found specially influential, or did these changes come about gradually and in the background? I mean, definitely yes to the first part, although I would call it more evolved than changed, but how much YouTube has to do with all that is hard to say. Since I started YouTube, I lived in 3 different countries, completed a BA, a graduate degree and a master's degree, and met people from all walks of life. All this obviously affected my worldview more than YouTube did. With that said, YouTube definitely helped me gain numerous skills, and the large amounts of research I have done into a wide variety of topics due to YouTube definitely affected the way I look at history and the world around me. But as I said, I don't think it was the most influential part of my life that changed my worldview from where it was 6 years ago. I also don't think there was any specific video I can really pinpoint to as being the most influential in this. Which time period are you hoping to make more videos on? Well, unsurprisingly, the early medieval period. For example, I have been promising a video on the early history of the Romanians for a very long time now. It's just the topic is so convoluted, I'm trying to figure out a way to present it the most objectively I can, and that is taking a long time. But yeah, expect more early medieval history videos. Although, I will never stop making videos on random niche history things that I get interested in for whatever reason. Favorite type of cheese? Well, with me being a Slovak who actually loves brinzové halušky, I just have to say my favorite type of cheese is brinza. My hands are tied on this one, sorry. What YouTube channels do you watch the most? Well, let's get the easy ones out of the way first. Jesse Cox, Linus Tech Tips, TechLinked, Polymatter, NativeLang, Veritasium, Artigame, and Captain Disillusion are the ones I have watched the most lately that aren't history YouTubers. When it comes to history YouTubers, there are many that I'm subscribed to, I think like almost over 60 or something, but there's just not enough time in the world to watch everything they release, and in that sense there are only a couple of history YouTubers whose new videos I always watch. These are Jack Rackham, Cogito, Guthlag, Historia Civilis, History Marsh, Cynical Historian, and Useful Charts. Of course, there are plenty of other good history channels that I did not mention and I would recommend checking out, but I just personally don't regularly watch those channels as I don't have unlimited amount of time. What was your most challenging video to make? Every video has its own unique challenges. For example, the only source for the War of the Bucket video was in Italian, so I had to get someone to help me translate parts of it. The only sources from the Drowning in the Poop video were in Latin and German, which, yes, I'm learning those languages, but it was still challenging translating stuff, especially old manuscripts. With that said, I will divide this question into two questions: the most frustrating video to make, and the most work done for a video. I can tell you right away, the most frustrating video to make was the Good King Wenceslas Carol video, especially because at the time I was not as familiar with using library databases as I'm now, and also because once I found out the truth about the Carol, I realized to get to it I went the most convoluted way possible. In reality, I could have just looked up in some old reference book all the works done by Václav Alois Svoboda and there see that he did write the story of Good King Wenceslas, but to be fair, that wouldn't make as much of an entertaining story as it did, so maybe it's for the best. The most work I have done for a video is either the Slavic-Venetic connection or the Treaty of Saint-Germain and the breakup of Austria. It depends on how you define work. The Slavic-Venetic connection is something that is part of my expertise, and therefore even though overall that video definitely needed the most research, I have already done that research during my academics, so when it came to actually doing the video, I did not have to do that much work. The breakup of Austria video was on the opposite side of that spectrum, where I had to basically start my research from scratch. Well, that's not completely true. I mean, I do know probably more than the average person about Austria-Hungary, mainly because I like reading about its history, but the topic is far from my expertise and therefore I always approach the research with the mentality as if I don't know anything about it. So even though there was less research overall compared to the Slavic-Venetic connection video, I had to do all the research from the scratch. Plus, I made an entire freaking language map of 1910 Austria. So, come to think of it, yeah, probably the most work I did for a video was for that one. I only talked about research here, not editing, mainly because I find editing to be very monotonous and similar from video to video, and therefore the amount of editing work required for a video is always correlated with its length rather than anything else. Plus, my time and effort spent editing is usually much smaller than my time spent writing and researching. That's mostly because I value writing and researching far more than editing. What type of videos would you like to make but can't because of lack of views / YouTube disliking it? To my detriment, I don't think there is a video I wouldn't make due to a lack of views or YouTube disliking it. It is a terrible business decision, but if I wanted to make a YouTube video about a certain topic, I'll make a video about that topic. I mean, I never thought the Avar Siege of Byzantium video or the Medieval Nomads video would do well. I just wanted to make those videos, so I did. Although this sentiment comes from the fact that I don't do YouTube full-time and I do still focus on my academics, so I can afford making videos about topics I know won't do that well. However, in the future, when I start doing YouTube full-time, this sentiment would most likely change, which sucks, but that is sadly the nature of the platform. I'll probably just start doing videos like History Matters does because that's the best way to make money. If you're not a big fan of that, then the only way to change that really is if I had way more patrons that I have now, because that's the only way for me to not be as financially reliant on the algorithm and the views. Special thanks to all my current patrons without whom this video wouldn't be possible, and also thanks to my deity tier patron Tonuka. My name is MLaser, and as always, stick around for history.